Good evening. This is Thomas Reutman. I'm a hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Cerise Waiters is the clerk of this hearing. I just want to apologize in advance. My computer has been not acting correctly this afternoon, so I'm using a cell phone to conduct this hearing, but so far so good. So bear with me if we have any glitches, but we'll do our best to power through it. This hearing is being recorded via Zoom and will be available afterwards through a link on the San Francisco Public Works website, sfpublicworks.org. As this is a virtual hearing, there's no sign-in sheet. So if you'd like to receive information about the results of this hearing, please send an email to the email address listed on the hearing notice. If you do not have that with you, please contact the Bureau of Urban Forestry at urbanforestry@sfdpw.org. This public hearing is being held to consider 5 items. Order number 204445 for 1650 Sutter Street to consider removal of 1 tree with replacement. Order number 204446 450 Los Palmos Drive to consider removal of 1 palm tree without replacement. Order number 204447, adjacent to 1351 42nd Avenue, to consider removal of 19 street trees with replacement. And adjacent to 1351 42nd Avenue, the trees are on 42nd and 43rd Avenue frontages. Staff has approved 5 removals and the public has protested. Next is order number 204448, 160 Mira Loma Drive to consider removal of 1 tree with replacement. And the last case will be order number 204449, 1868 Greenwich Street to consider removal of 1 significant tree on private property without replacement. My job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing item, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works make determinations. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I will forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the director. The director will make the final determinations. When the director's determinations are made, the department will notify you of them if you've provided us contact information. The hearing will proceed as follows in the 5 cases. First, I'll ask the Public Works staff to speak and present the case. Then I'll allow the property owner, applicant, or appellant to speak. Then any member of the public or witness who wants to speak. Then the department, if the department would like to address any comments. And then the property owner, applicant, or appellant again, if that person has any rebuttals. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers and will indicate when the speaker has 30 seconds left. If you are a party to this proceeding, I will call on you to speak. If you'd like to use visual materials in your presentation, please let me know before you speak. You will then have the standard 3 minutes to provide your comments. If you are a member of the public or witness who wants to speak, wait for me to call for public comments and then use Zoom's raise your hand feature to put yourself in the queue to speak. If you've dialed in by phone, raise your hand by pressing *9, and when told you are being unmuted, press *6 to unmute yourself before speaking. When it is your turn to speak, I will recognize you. And again, if you'd like to use visual materials in your presentation, please let me know before you speak. You'll then have the standard 3 minutes to provide your comments. Comments and questions should be addressed to me and not to the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you may submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing, in which case you would have to put that in the chat. If I feel that a question is warranted, I will ask the question. After all comments are completed, I will close the item. We'll now begin the hearing. Order number 204445. May I have Public Works make its presentation?
Thank you. Sorry about that. I had to unmute myself. This is Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. And I'm going to bring up the PowerPoint in just a moment. So let's bring this up from the beginning. And Cerise, if you could just confirm that you're able to see the first slide up there.
Chris, you're good. This is
Yes, we
Clint.
can see it. Yes.
Great. Thank you. Just want to check. So this is order 204445, and this is regarding the removal of a ficus tree adjacent to 1615 Sutter Street. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. I'm going to go through some images of the subject tree, excuse me. This is a view of the tree before it had a very large failure earlier this year. This photo was taken 2017. But as you can see in this image taken on February 12th of this year, about a half of the tree split off due to a structural failure of the ficus tree. Here's a close-up of the damage of the remaining sections of the ficus tree. If you look to the just behind the fresh wound, you see other signs of previous failures. So this tree has had multiple large stem failures. The most recent one in February is the largest failure that it's experienced, but the remaining sections of the tree are no longer sustainable. In fact, we even consider this to be a hazard. The remaining sections on the tree are really prone to fail, especially now that it's imbalanced. This shows the image on the left. Again, to the layperson, nothing may jump out to you on the left, but as an arborist, I can see very large stem actually coming off a smaller stem and with included bark and codominant stems. So that's a structural weakness in ficus trees, which is really well documented the last 10 years or so in San Francisco throughout various media, print and news media. So we really look closely at ficus trees to avoid having them split apart like this. This is a look at the remaining sections of the tree, and they too are prone to fail. And there's enough of a failure risk here that we do consider this a hazardous tree. And so we did a 15-day hazardous notice on this tree. And during that 15-day period, we received a protest from the public, which triggered the scheduling of this item for the hearing this evening. So it's removal with one replacement tree. There is room for the replacement. We'll plant with a different species than ficus. And this is just a copy of that posting notice. But we consider this to be a pretty serious public safety issue, probably falling just shy of a 24-hour removal effort, but we're concerned nonetheless. So we believe what remains of this tree needs to be removed right away. That concludes the staff presentation for this item. Thank you.
If the appellant is present, can you provide testimony? Let me just clarify the mechanism. This is the first time I've hosted in Zoom, so I should have explained that if you'd like to comment, please raise your hand using the Zoom quote, raise your hand function to put yourself in the queue. If we don't see any hands, then we will see if anyone is called in by phone. Press *9 to get in the queue. If not, we'll give another 30 seconds or so for appellant to try to get that going. And if we don't hear, then we'll allow public comment.
I do not see any hands at this time.
Okay, are there any public comments? You can now raise your hand or get in the queue on this specific item.
We have John Nolte.
Okay,
Go ahead, Mr. Nolte, you can speak.
Yes. So saying that this tree is a hazard, can we, is it possible to really trim back the tree instead of taking it out? And then my second question is, you never spoke of what this the timeline to remove the tree neck, because you said it was possibly hazardous. And also, if you're going to replace it, what type of species would you replace it by? And what would be the timeline in which to replace it? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nolte.
Are there any
I
other?
don't see any other hands at this time.
Okay, maybe Chris, if you can just respond to those comments before we close this, if you have any of the requested information about the timeline for removal and what type of tree would go in its place.
Sure, Chris Buck with Bureau of Urban Forestry. So Public Works will, because of the nature of this public safety issue with a 15-day notice, once approved, we would try to remove this tree as soon as we can, certainly within a month, but literally give it to our tree crew to remove it as soon as possible. So that would be anywhere from a week to a month to remove the tree. Then the timeline for replacement would be 6 months to replace. In the species, I could always email Mr. Nolte the specific species. We, depending on availability of the species at the nursery, I don't want to kind of misquote myself here, so we can forward that. But again, it's typically the inspector looks at other species in that immediate corridor, and we try to match species based on similar growth rates and habits. So it's something I can follow up on and provide that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I think since there's no other comments there, we'll close this order and move to order number 204446, and we'll ask Public Works to make its presentation.
Thank you. This is Chris Buck again with Bureau of Urban Forestry. And let's get back to this PowerPoint here. Let's go to current slide. Thanks for waiting. So we had a street tree adjacent to 450 Los Palmos Drive, order 204446, and it was to consider the removal of one palm tree without replacement. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. And this relates to permit application number 785315. And so we received an application to remove the palm tree. In this image, center of the screen to the right, it's the tall palm tree above the roof line, mid-image on the right there. That's to the right of that silverish car, not planted towards the curb, but in the sidewalk right up near the base of the home. So when we received this application for removal, again, we evaluate trees within the public right of way. And if we believe the tree is relatively healthy and sustainable, our general practice is to deny a request if the tree is relatively healthy and sustainable. For this particular tree, we approved it at the staff level. There's no issue with the health of the tree. The issue here is really about the proximity of the tree to the building and the facade. And so as you can see, the head of this palm tree is now above the roof line, so it's going to get a lot more direct wind than it was getting before. And that's going to cause this tree to move around quite a bit in heavy wind. So although again, tree health not in question, the proximity to the building is a classic example of wrong tree, wrong place. So it's not typically an area where we would say, yes, go ahead and plant a large palm like this because of the potential damage to the home. And I understand although it's painted over, there has been plenty of contact. You can see that the fronds have been pruned off this tree. And if allowed to remain in place, I think there is risk of property damage And also more of the fronds would, as they die, they then hang and droop. And so there would just be a constant clearance issue where the tree and the fronds would be rattling against the top edge of the building. So that's why at the staff level, we had approved the tree for removal, showing a side view here, again, showing there's very little wiggle room, literally, for this palm tree to move without the potential for damage to the facade. So in terms of a sustainability perspective, we approved this because we just felt that this is not a situation that we would deny a homeowner who needs to protect their home. And then in terms of like how we determine the width of the public right of way, that's determined not by staff. I mean, it's confirmed by staff, but it's determined through the key maps that are on file. The city has an electronic version of that. And what I mean to say here is that the public right of way is not limited to just the developed sidewalk. It's actually 7 feet wide here, which is in line with about the main front facade, even beyond and past the bay window. So there's a 7-foot public right of way. The palm tree is technically within that public right of way. And so this is considered a street tree. And again, another view from the side. Again, picture this tree moving easily a foot or more in either direction, and you're going to have contact and potential for property damage. Unfortunately, what happened in preparation for the hearing, Public Works confirmed that this application, although submitted a while back, a permit had never been issued for this removal because during the posting period, we received a public protest, I believe 2 of them. And so when we went to go post the notices on the tree, we found and heard from the applicant that the tree had already been removed. Now, to be consistent with how we handle similar cases, even if the permit had been languishing, Public Works, we have a lot of permit applicants, and if we haven't heard from someone, we recommend they get in touch with us and check the status of their permit. Typically, we're in touch, but not always. But our code does say that a permit needs to be issued before a street tree may be removed. And this is the reason why, because we do get protests. It's a very real process. So I won't belabor the point, but certainly removing a tree without a permit, having it come to light this way amidst the hearing process, it just sends a signal to the public that Public Works is not, protecting and managing the urban forest. And so that's the concern here. So we'll, I'm sure, hear from folks involved, but to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases, we issued the administrative fine for $2,193 for removal of a street tree without a permit. And so this matter is largely now going to pivot to an administrative process where the applicant will have the opportunity to request administrative hearing. So at this point in time, the tree's been removed. We've issued a fine, and we'll really be pursuing the matter that way. But this did get on the calendar, on the agenda. And so we are actually technically here to discuss the removal. And so we still have the hearing because the hearing notice got issued. So that's why we're here this evening to talk about the removal of the tree. That wraps up my staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I don't know if there's any point, given that the tree is gone, in discussing the worthiness of the removal, but in light of the process, I'll offer the applicant the opportunity to, sorry, not the applicant, but the appellant, the opportunity to give testimony. If the appellant has, I want to give the priority to the appellant who initially got this on calendar for appeal. And if we don't see a hand raised in the next 10 seconds, then let's open it up to other public comment. But
Okay, there is a hand, Mr. Reutemann.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Remy, go ahead and speak. We should be able to hear you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually not
Yes.
the applicant or the protester. So I guess I just wanted to make a quick statement that I don't believe this is the fine hearing, and that possibly the decision that we come up with today based on this hearing may come into play with the fine hearing, unless I'm misunderstanding that we are doing the protest hearing and the fine hearing at the same time now. We have not received notice of the fine hearing yet, so I just want to be clear that maybe the decision made here today might have an impact on the later fine hearing. So, and to be clear, I am a representative arborist for a private company who engaged the clients and helped with the application for the removal of the palm tree at 450 Los Palmos.
Okay, thank you. I think let's start with just the nature of the order, which is the posting for removal. And if anyone has any testimony on that specifically, the illegal removal aside, let's hear those comments first. And then if those comments are done, I will hand it back to Chris from Urban Forestry to assess whether we're discussing the fine and illegal removal here, or if that's tabled for another hearing.
Yeah, and if I could just chime in, this is Chris with Public Works. I do want to quickly clarify, this is not the fine hearing. So we bring it up simply because we can't, we wanted the public who may be attending to just understand that the tree was removed. But there'll be a separate process for the fine, and that will not be a decision made here this evening. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Mr. Reutemann, there's one hand from Josh. Did you
Okay.
want? Okay.
Please give your testimony, Josh. Thank you.
Good to see you again, Mr. Reutemann. It's been a while. And congratulations on figuring out how to Zoom from your phone. That is something I have not yet mastered. I guess there's nothing to discuss about the merits of the tree removal because the tree is already gone. So I'm just asking to please be informed of if and when this goes to a fine hearing, because I would like to attend that. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. We will make sure that we keep you apprised of the date and time of that hearing. Is there any other public comment or hands raised in the chat?
There are no more hands at this time.
Okay, I think we'll conclude this order and move to the next order, which is order number 204447. And I'll have Chris make his presentation.
Thank you, Chris Buck again with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. As I stall to pull up the PowerPoint. Current slide. Thank you. So order 204447. This is a site at 1351 42nd Avenue. And we received an application to consider the removal of 19 street trees with replacement. It's adjacent again to 1351. The trees are on the 42nd and 43rd Avenue frontages of the property. Staff approved 5 of the trees for the removal, and the public protested the approval of those 5 trees. We denied the removal of 14 trees, and the applicant has appealed that denial. And so we're here this evening to cover both appeals and protests from the applicant and/or the public. So the applicant will likely do a much more thorough explanation of their project overall. But this is the site that is subject of the tree removal. The former owner, or the site is owned by the SFUSD, was currently operating as a park and community center. And our bureau was actually asked about 5 years ago to plant trees here after that conversion, just to try to give it a little more life, get some environmental presence out there with street trees. So unfortunately, we did just plant a lot of the trees that are out here that are subject of this application for removal just a few years ago. This is information that my inspector for this area of the city put into the PowerPoint. So this is just taking information off the project. It's a planned development here, housing with rental units, and homes would be affordable to low to moderate and middle income school district educator households. So that's the nature of the project. And then on the bottom is an image that shows you the scale of the project, that it's certainly much different than the homes on that block. So there is a landscape plan that's presented and designed by the project team. There are a total of 11 trees planned for replacement. So it wouldn't be a 1-for-1 replacement. If all trees were approved for removal, that would be removal of 19 trees with replacement with 11. The project's required to plant street trees as part of the project itself. So even if there were no street trees adjacent to the property, the project itself triggers a tree planting requirement. And based on the frontage, that would require 25 new street trees. There are significant amounts of landscaping planned to be installed in the public right of way. And on the 43rd frontage, there's also a landscape setback, which will be accessible to the public. And going through, I'll show a number of different images here. So the Bureau of Urban Forestry only approved 5 of the 19 proposed tree removals. You heard me say earlier that we generally keep our arborist hats on, and we make decisions based on tree health. We're not here to judge a project. And so these are the location of the trees that we approved, where these trees are not in good condition. They're in poor condition. So on 42nd Ave, there's 2 Catalina ironwood trees, Lionothamnus floribundus. Both trees are in poor and declining condition. So again, at the staff level, these were trees that we felt like they are in poor condition. We wouldn't be able to, with good information, defend denying these trees for removal. They're in poor condition, and changing water habits or anything like that is that option is long left these trees, because they're well established. So there's nothing we can really do to bring these trees to good health, unfortunately. Again, on 42nd Avenue, there's 9 trees have been denied for removal. The removal was denied because the trees are in relatively good condition. They don't interfere with the constructability of the project. So those subject trees are 8 Lagenaria pattersonii, or primrose. We planted these trees about 4 years ago, and until recently required weekly watering to become established, but now the trees are well established. The species is well suited for the Sunset's microclimate, and the columnar species, the form of this columnar species, will not interfere with the planned building facade. So the image on the left in the center of the screen shows what this tree starts to look like as it gets older. Is very, very upright. So it's a tree that should be able to be worked around during construction. And notes from the inspector is that approximately 15-year-old olive tree has also been denied for removal. These are images of some of the trees that we've denied. Again, they're relatively small, but it took us 3 years of watering the trees once a week to get them established. And this is way out in the outer Sunset, and it's difficult to get street trees established where it's so windy out here. Again, the olive tree, and the second image in the back is a denial. One tree was a denial, but since we initiated this process, the health of the tree has declined. So that's the tree on the right. It's an olive tree that we now actually would approve. So I'll have to double check the math, but that means that we approved 5 trees. I think this would be theoretically a 6th tree that would be open to approving because it's in declining condition. So a summary for 42nd Ave is 9 young trees in good condition, street trees. We put in a lot of resources to get them established, although they're still relatively small. We still believe the existing trees can be incorporated into the new design and protected during construction. Regarding the 43rd frontage, 43rd Ave, we approved the removal of 3 trees that are in poor condition. These removals happen to align with planned utility installation. Just a bit of a coincidence there. We denied the removal of 5 trees that are in fair condition. The large setback on 43rd should allow for existing trees to be incorporated in the new design and protected during construction. This is tree 2 on the 43rd Ave frontage, approved for removal because it's poorly established. We have 2 approximately 15-year-old olive trees that we're denying because they're relatively healthy. And tree number 6 on the 43rd frontage is denied. This is a pretty small tree, but there's nothing physically wrong with it. It's still hanging in there. Also on 43rd Avenue, tree 7, we've approved this tree for removal, another Lionothamnus, really not doing well at all, and not a tool in our toolbox to bring the health of this tree around. Tree number 6 is a denial. It's an olive tree that has fair condition and form. Again, not an incredible tree that maybe knocks your socks off, but it's a tree nonetheless, and we've gotten it established, and that takes a lot of work. Tree number 12 is an approval. It's a Tristania larina, and it's the type that has a more downward or pendulous form. So it's starting to die back on the top. Not a great cultivar of the species, so we recommend allowing that to be removed. So despite the project's large size, we do believe the project would be able to preserve and protect many of the trees. In other areas of the city, like on Van Ness, where the BRT project had to take a lane of traffic to construct their project, that applicant literally had no room to install or use any space to construct a building. Here, these are relatively, by comparison, relatively wide sidewalks. So they're not big trees, but they are established. We recently got them established. So to just try to keep our arborist hats on, we're here to say we think these trees could be retained. That's the summary of our case here. This was pulled together by Stephen Keller, and I believe there may be multiple representatives to speak to various parts of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Given that there's a mix of approvals and denials, I'd like to hear from the applicants who are appealing the denials first. And after we go through the first person from the applicant side, please let us know if it's just you or if there'll be multiple parties presenting. And then after that, we'll move to those appealing the removals that were approved by Buff. And then we'll, depending how many there are, we'll go back to Buff to provide response as needed.
Mr. Reutemann, we have Michelle Kim. Michelle, you should be able to unmute yourself at this time.
Great, thank you. This is Michelle Kim with Mid-Penn Housing. Like it was noted, we do have 2 other individuals on the team who will be speaking in a particular order. And we also have materials to share on my screen. So logistically, how would you like us to move on?
You are able to go ahead and share. I've already promoted you to panelist.
Okay.
So you're able to share at this time.
Great.
And you'll
Just
have
a reminder.
have 3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
No, so that, and I got very much.
Great, thank you so much. So good evening and thank you in advance for your time to review a request. My name is Michelle Kim and I'm with Mid-Penn Housing, a regional nonprofit affordable housing developer, owner, manager, and resident services provider. I'm the senior project manager working on the Shirley Chisholm Village project, and I'm here with the project's arborist, Walter Levison, and landscape architect, Chris Watkins with Fletcher Studio. Both will provide details on the tree removal requests submitted for the project. Before I turn it over to Walter and Chris, I'd like to provide a quick overview of the affordable housing development. Shirley Chisholm Village will be San Francisco's first affordable housing development to serve educators employed by the San Francisco Unified School District. The 135 unit project is located in the Outer Sunset neighborhood on school district owned property at 43rd and Irving. This development will serve educators and their families, earning 40% to 120% area median income, which translates to an annual household income of approximately $52,000 to $154,000 for a family of 4. As noted by staff, the project site is a former elementary school currently used for playland and administrative uses. Since 2018, Mid-Penn has been in contact with the surrounding neighborhood and has held 3 large public meetings between August 2018 and February 2019 to receive input on the proposed development and its design. Of the comments received pertaining to the street trees around the project site, there were comments noting that the existing street trees are small, several in poor condition, and that the community would like to see larger and healthier street trees. As I noted previously, the project site is currently used as playland, which was created through the city's Pavement to Parks program in 2016. And during the development's community outreach, the neighborhood expressed a desire for an outdoor accessible space since the existing playland would no longer be available. As a result, the project features an outdoor play area accessible for the property's residents and neighborhood children. I'll turn it over to Chris Watkins, who will speak more to this area as well as interface with the new proposed street trees. So if you're able to unmute Chris Watkins, or I'm sorry, actually, if you could unmute Walter Levison or arborist, that'd be great.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Levison.
Hello, good evening. Walter Levison, consulting arborist here. I was retained initially in 2019 as the consulting arborist on this project to assess 21 trees. And I tagged and assessed them as trees number 51 through 71 on 42nd and 43rd Avenue. 57 was a dead Italian buckthorn, and that's now gone. And tree number 60 is also gone. That was a very poor overall condition Tristaniopsis lorina. The remaining 19 trees are 4 Tristaniopsis lorina, 4 Olea europea, 8 Lagunaria pattersonii, the cowhage tree, and 3 Lionothamnus floribundus, the Catalina ironwood. The tree conditions range from poor to exceptional. Most of the exceptional trees were the cowhage trees, the Lagunaria pattersonii, which Chris Buck was mentioning earlier. The main limitation to good growth performance at this site is the lack of piped irrigation water. And as Chris was noted, I guess the city of San Francisco has been irrigating those lagunarias for a number of years. The project proposes to install a number of new cowhage trees, and all new street trees will be irrigated via piped water. The site is limited due to being in zone 17 with high wind on a regular basis, salt air, fog. So a lot of the trees that I surveyed were in poor condition due to a combination of lack of regular soil moisture and also the windy, foggy conditions, which make it difficult for trees to establish and gain good growth performance.
Mr. Levison, are you there?
Yeah, that basically concludes my portion of the talk.
Okay, thank you. And then we Mr. Watkins.
Hi there.
Yes, hi.
you hit the next slide? Hi there, my name is Chris Watkins and I'm an associate and project manager at Fletcher Studio. We're a small landscape architecture and urban design firm based in the Dogpatch, and we've completed many affordable housing projects within San Francisco. I'm going to run through the existing and proposed trees for the site, as well as some of the challenges. This is our site bordered by 43rd and 2nd Street. It is currently playland and is located in the outer Sunset neighborhood, which is characterized by its lack of urban canopy. Next slide. Challenges to that urban canopy include compressed soils, inadequate nutrients to those soils, undersized tree pits allowing water and oxygen to the roots of the trees, stunted growth from the aforementioned reasons, and also no regular irrigation, as multiple people have mentioned. All of these we will be remedying with our proposed trees. Next slide. Here is a review of the existing trees on site, which some of the site photos that Walter has shown, Chris Buck has shown, and as well as a list for our recommendations for removal, both from the arborist and also due to the site constraints. Due to being a commercial project, we're required to install streetlights, with BUF itself has recommendations and requirements for spacing for those streetlights. So we get as many trees as we can as a part of our project, and we're quite successful at doing it at Fletcher Studio. Next slide. Here's a comparison from one of the best trees on site, one of the aforementioned olives. You can see its tree pit is currently 3 feet by 3 feet, and it's about 10 feet tall. We are specifying all 36-inch box trees currently on both 42nd and 43rd Street, which the regular nursery size is from 20 to 25 feet. Our planting pits will also be much larger with ground level planting. As you can see, this example is 5 feet by 17 feet with varying cases on both 42nd and 43rd. Next slide. Here's a comparison of our proposed with the existing trees. We understand that fewer trees are going in, but I'll show how we are contributing to make up for that urban canopy. And we're also providing the best conditions for these trees to succeed, have the correct spacing, and eventually achieve a mature canopy size. Laganaria powdersonia is successful on the site, as we noted previously, and we will be proposing to continue to use that tree on 42nd Street. Metrostroides excelsa, and the New Zealand Christmas tree, also has many successful outer sunset examples, and we will be using that tree on 43rd Street. As I mentioned before, all tree replacements are going to be 36-inch box size trees. Next slide.
You have 10 seconds remaining.
We're adding 7 additional trees that we are not getting credit for, but we like to add to the urban canopy. Next slide. Here's a rendering of that space. Next slide. And all in, we're providing 28 trees with 1,000 square feet of eligible planting. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Watkins.
Thank you for the testimony. Unless there's other applicants or people speaking on behalf of, I guess, protesting the removal, if you could, sorry, let me rephrase that. If there's anyone else in the hearing who is appealing the denial of removal from BUF, please raise your hand. Okay, hearing.
We have Aaron Carson. Go ahead and speak. You should be able to unmute yourself. Okay, they say that they are switching to the phone. Okay.
In the meantime, is there anyone else, Cerise, that's
Yes.
okay.
Is it John Funk? Go ahead. You should be able to.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't clear to me. Is this the public? I mean, Is this the public questioning now?
Yeah, what we're trying to do is we're coming in the order where before we talk about protesting the approved removal of trees, we want to hear from people that are protesting the denial of the trees that Buff said no to removing. And then after we're done with all that testimony, we'll move to those who are protesting the removals that were approved.
All right, this is somewhat confusing.
Okay, are you protesting trees that have been,
Well,
do you want trees removed or not removed?
Well, so it's not quite that simple for the neighbor. So I'm a neighbor of the site, and it's not a matter of what we, you know, we're approving. I am actually sorry. So I'm a neighbor. I live right across the street from Playland, which will be the proposed site. And we're just wanting to express our support for the existing plan removal and addition of the trees. So it's, you know, it's kind of complex that way. From what I understand, the removal of the trees and the addition of the new trees would actually give us a bigger canopy. We're gonna have an obstructed view now of our house with from the front of our house is with a 5-story building. And the understanding here is, the hope here was that we would have a much bigger canopy as the Mid-Penn people were, or the Fletcher folks were mentioning. So this is more of kind of a support of the whole project as proposed by Mid-Penn, removals and additions. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. You were the appropriate order of party to be expressing support for the project. If there's anyone else who's expressing support for the project and the removal of the trees that were denied by Buff, this is when we'd like to hear your testimony.
Hi, can you hear me now? This is Erin Carson with the Mayor's Office of Housing.
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I'm having technological issues tonight. So I appreciate the presentations. I did want to just support the overall program. This is a project that will result in what I think is going to be a very successful final street tree in terms of the cohesion of design, the size of the trees, as well as their ability to be sustainable on an ongoing basis. So I think they will be healthier, last longer, have larger at the beginning as well as over time, which I think will just be attractive and beautiful. So we appreciate staff and the public support of this project. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone else raising their hand specifically to support the proposed removals and/or project? Okay, if we don't have any more hands on that, then I'll open it up to people who would like to protest the removal of the trees as part of the project where Buff has approved those removals.
We have Josh. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I understand that the mayor has put out the word to planning that housing is to be expedited. And I understand that planning is primarily funded by developer fees, which means that our planning department is incentivized to approve plans that are brought to planning as quickly as possible when that involves new housing, and that trees are not prioritized in that consideration. I think that housing is very important, and housing for educators, I think I heard that somewhere, is even more awesome. My dad and my sister are both teachers. So I don't take issue with the proposed removal and replacement of mostly dead trees, but healthy trees and trees that were just planted either by Friends of the Urban Forest or by the Bureau of Urban Forestry. That took a ton of fundraising, volunteer hours, and most importantly, tax dollars that were given to the city by the taxpaying people who live here, and not just the people who live nearby, but all San Franciscans. This is an investment in our city's green infrastructure, not to mention the money that went into caring for those trees to establishment, which Chris said accurately is no small feat. The resources that Chris refers to that went into these trees is the money that we, the people who live in San Francisco, paid the city to take care of those trees and to take care of us. So what this means is that if you're going to develop in San Francisco, you need to respect the green infrastructure because that belongs to the people who live here. The diagram about soils and infrastructure, it's kind of remarkable. It seems to me if you sort of took that to extreme, it sort of begs the question why there are any trees in that neighborhood at all, unless they have perfect irrigation, which is pretty impractical. And the infrastructural conflicts are conflicts created by the design itself. When you're designing your construction, you need to take established green infrastructure into consideration. When you're considering your construction methods, you should take established green infrastructure into consideration as well. Regarding frontage, construction in San Francisco is tricky, as Chris mentioned. This is actually an embarrassment of open frontage at this particular site. So in conclusion, the standard for removal is not what you promise to do later or what certain people would prefer to have versus what we have. When you've got a healthy tree, you need to protect it. So I would respectfully object to any request for removal based on anything other than the health of the trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Can we go to the next appellant for anyone that's raised their hand or called in for protesting the removal?
We have John Nolte. Go ahead, Mr. Nolte.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I lived in the outer Sunset, and so I'm quite familiar with the weather there, and it is a big feat for these trees to have survived for 3 years and got to the maturity where they're at. Also because the Sunset has a lot of fog during the daytime, and so it doesn't get that much sunshine for these trees to really mature. So I think it's a big feat and a hands off to Burf for taking care of these trees for 3 years to get them to where they're at. And I think again, these were paid by the funds were used by city money to keep these trees in place before the plans were even considered for this project. And Buff took the time to water them for over 3 years, and they have gotten to where they're at. So I would prefer them to stay and to reject the project sponsor request to remove the trees that are not necessary for the project to be removed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Nolte. Is there anyone else protesting the removal?
I see no other hands at this time.
Okay, what I'd like to do is just open up a little forum for Chris to address some of the comments from both parties, particularly I guess what I'm curious about, and maybe with the two arborists here, you can help clarify. Is there any way that the trees that Buff deemed healthy and not in need of replacement can be salvaged and replanted in the appropriate box and soil and irrigation as the arborist sort of contended, or the landscape architect contended, that they need a bigger space and better soil? Is that something where those trees can be replanted in that space rather than cut down and a small one put in its place?
Good evening, Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. So, there's some things that could occur for the existing trees that we feel are in good enough condition. I appreciate the thoroughness of the report from the applicant in terms of, it seems like we're generally on the same page about, some of the trees are relatively, doing fine. They agreed with that. And, I think most notable what they were pointing out is that we did have to hand water. And that's a lot different from installing irrigation. So I guess really our issue here is just at a staff level, trying to be consistent. There are times when a single tree for a garage or a driveway, if someone can replace the tree removed with a tree that's of equal size or greater, that's something that the Bureau and staff have considered before as a factor. But for us, there's just the large number of trees proposed for removal. We're arborists. The easiest thing for us is just to say, we're not going to have our planning hat on. We're just going to, perform our role as arborists. So to answer your question a little bit more specifically, so it's really hard to get trees established out there. We all agree. Certainly would be easier to do that with irrigation, but we've established these trees. So these trees are established. Boxing up, moving, reusing these trees. I think in this setting and this environment, I really would be reluctant to personally, as a staff, get involved with guaranteeing anyone that digging up any of these trees and reusing these trees in the same environment would be a good idea, because it's just such a brutal environment. You really want to have great quality tree stock with not a lot of impacts from digging and handling and moving. So from the perspective of reusing the trees, I just, I always hesitate. I think it often falls on Buff to police those things. And when the conditions are about as harsh as we can possibly get out there, it makes me even more nervous. So, I think the applicant it's a good point. They are proposing to plant trees that would be of equal size of the ones removed, if not larger. And the installation of irrigation will definitely help with their establishment. It'll be a lot easier for them to establish than it was for us. So I can speak to the truth behind that. And then at the same time, we do have to, at the staff level, and again, at the director level, other decisions could be made, but at the staff level, our message really is work around existing healthy trees. So a few moving pieces here. I think, as we stated in our kind of opening staff presentation, we understand the desire to do this, but at the same time, as the public pointed out, it took a lot of resources for us to get to this point. So that's kind of where we find ourselves on this one. But I hesitant to say, hey, let's box these trees up and then reestablish them on the site again. To me, is with the wind out there, it just is a challenging situation. So.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I think what I'd like to do is, I guess, hear from the applicant, Mr. Levison, maybe. And specifically, I'd like to know if we were to hold the trees that Buff has denied, is there a way that you can practically install all the planting and mitigation and work around those trees and still provide the basin and the irrigation that you need without harming the tree?
Yeah, typically, I basically agree with everything that Chris Buck just said. This is Walter Levison. It's my understanding with discussions with Midpen and Fletcher Studio that it may be quite difficult to have utilities installed between the street and the project, and new irrigation piping and street lights and all the conduit runs for that electrical, all of this underground work, and also get the sidewalks rebuilt with a new planter configuration. Can't remember, I think it's 5 foot by 17 feet or something along those lines for the dimensions of each tree cut out. It may be quite difficult to do all of that and still not harm the cowitch trees, the Lagunaria pattersoniais. We might have to get an engineer in to speak further to that. And generally, it's about 10 times more expensive to move a tree than it is to plant a standard boxed or plastic liner type tree into the ground at 10 or 20 times more expensive, which Chris Buck alluded to. And there's never any guarantee that the transplanted tree would survive and thrive into the future.
Maybe I didn't make my question clear. What I'm trying to get after is the appellants who oppose the removal of healthy trees feel that they should be prioritized so that your plan, including sidewalk and how you lay out the basins and utilities, can take those trees into account and basically detour around them rather than cutting through them, thereby obviating the need to remove those trees. So what we're trying to find out from you or the designer is what options do you have to still make the project functional without having to necessarily take those trees out, but you can just shift things around.
Yeah, I'd have to defer to MidPen on that. You'd have to get an engineer to speak to that.
Is there anything that the landscape architect or the project sponsor can address on that without getting into too technical at the specifics of the coordination?
Yes, I can address that. Thank you for opening up the floor. This is Chris Watkins again from Fletcher Studio. You know, we're quite familiar with these hearings, and as Chris Buck stated after our presentation, I think we can all say we're working towards the same goal here. We'd love to work with the existing trees, but I'd like to have Walter confirm, but I believe that the trees are at a state that even if they overcame the current conditions that I specified before, that they wouldn't be able to grow to full maturity. Even if they overcame those 5 conditions to grow to full maturity, they're spaced too closely to become successful. So BOF has its own guidelines of spacing trees minimum across the street so that when they allow for full maturity, they reach edge to edge instead of overlapping and competing with each other. So yeah, I'll just say we're looking for the best, healthiest urban canopy, and we're trying to do that from day one and keep it going quickly into the future with all the amendments. So to conclude, to say, I just don't think it's possible to do that same outcome with the existing trees.
Okay, thank you. Since I gave the applicants an opportunity to follow up, I'll give the appellants who cited their reasons for why they feel that those trees should be worked around an opportunity to provide feedback to that response, now knowing that there's some limitations on what the owner can practically do to install the project. Let's start with either Josh or John.
Thanks. This is Josh. It feels like I just heard was, and maybe I'm wrong, but what it feels like I just heard is that the city doesn't know how to plant trees and where to put them, because the city has these rules that it's created. Those rules are codified, and we have a tree species list that is approved by the Urban Forestry Council year after year, and we have a team of arborists that work for our Bureau of Urban Forestry that know the city probably better than anyone in terms of what trees will be most successful in what parts of the city based on our microclimates and the types of soils in those areas. So what I'm not understanding is why that's not good enough for this particular project, because that's what it feels like I'm hearing is that, well, these soils aren't right, or these trees aren't the right kind, or they're not going to succeed here. And this is all after the city has followed its own rules that, again, are a matter of regulation, not just policy or preference, and has this species selection list that is carefully vetted by a lot of really qualified people who put a lot of time and thought into it, our Urban Forestry Council. So that's where those things come from. These things aren't just kind of, willy-nilly, we'll put this tree here and see if it grows. And then the city, as Chris said, they hand watered these trees to make sure that they established. That is a remarkable investment of time and energy and resource. So time and time again, we see these projects, housing, whatever type of development it is, where the existing green infrastructure is treated as if it doesn't exist. And if the developer simply knows better about what will look better or whatever. This is endemic to our city. And it was only recently, I think in the last 2 or 3 weeks, that planning even bothered to put the issue of trees on a planning checklist. So if a tree is healthy, a tree is established, in this city where we have a 13.4% canopy and we are 8,000 trees behind on our 20-year urban forest plan, there is no excuse for ignoring a tree in the development process, in the planning process, and certainly no excuse to be taking out a healthy tree, and apparently, for a design that was created when the trees were already there, and based on the opinion of I assume somebody very wise about these things, against the opinion or against the regulatory processes of our own city departments. So I would respectfully maintain that objection based on what I've heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Mr. Nolte, if you'd like to give your feedback based on what you heard, if it changes or bolsters anything from your testimony.
I think it's been quite clearly stated that these trees, again, were already in place prior to the rendering of the new project, and therefore were not taken into account to their location and not worked around, so that they could be part of the project instead of taking them out. And having another city department that took 3 years to get them to where they're at now, maturity, I think shows the fact that the city is working to keep the greenery in especially in the outer Sunset where there's less trees. And as Chris Buck mentioned, the wind, because it's only a couple blocks from the ocean there. We have high winds there, and that's why we have closures of the Great Highway. So I think this is a great opportunity to show that the spirit of greening and maintaining greening in San Francisco, and the effort that the DPW did to water these trees for 3 years. So I think they should stay if they can be done so and looked at the plans again by the developer. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna hand it over to Chris one more time in case, after hearing both sides and the rebuttals, if you can frame up Buff's position and if you have any added thoughts on this that can help me and the department make a sound determination.
Thank you, Chris Buck with Bureau of Urban Forestry. So yeah, a couple of very brief, quick points. So I think one good news item for all involved here this evening is that there are no direct conflicts with constructability. And so I just want to emphasize that. Typically we have driveways, vaults, electrical vaults, any number of conflicts with what's proposed on site. So I can state a little bit more clearly for all involved. Our staff and our Bureau does believe that the project can successfully protect these trees that are that we're disputing. They can be protected and remain in place and continue to be an asset on the site. Some of the potential impacts, streetlight conduit is some of the most flexible in terms of how they can put in place that in the ground around trees versus say PG&E. So we do believe the existing trees that are established in good, fair, reasonable condition, that those can remain in place. It won't impact constructability of the building. And I think the landscaping could be modified to accommodate them. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That's helpful. If there's anyone that was protesting the removal or in support of the project who didn't speak earlier on this case, I'd have one more opportunity. If you already spoke on this case, then, you know, there's no more opportunity for you to speak on it. So I'll wait maybe 10 seconds to see if anyone else raises their hand on this.
We do have Paul Travis. Go ahead, Mr. Travis.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Paul Travis. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Housing, and I wanted to speak in support of the project. I think one thing that's been overlooked here, and while Buff has done a very commendable job starting with a 15-gallon tree, the project here is proposing trees that are substantially larger from the start. And it will be unfortunate to have a mix of these larger trees and the smaller trees. Part of what the neighborhood is interested in and has said more than once they want is a large canopy, in part to preserve privacy in the neighborhood, in addition to the positive effects of a forest canopy. So while a number of these trees, admittedly, a lot has gone into them, we do propose to do better. They will be 36-inch box trees. They will be larger caliper and substantially larger canopies. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Anyone else, Cerise, raise their hand or dial in?
There are no other hands at this time.
Okay, then we will take that testimony and close this order, and we'll move to the next order, which is order number 204448. And I'll have Public Works make the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen and get the PowerPoint back up. Let's move this down here. Okay, and thank you again. So this next item is related to a tree removal adjacent to 160 Miraloma Drive. And this is to consider the removal of one street tree with replacement. Staff approved the removal and the public has protested. So the subject tree in this case is the tree in the large tree to the left, on the left side of the street. It's a mature Monterey cypress tree and it has multiple stems. It's located just off the sidewalk. So we received an application for removal of the tree from the property owner, and during our evaluation process of the tree, it came to light that technically the tree is actually within the public right of way. So this initiated from the property owner seeking to make repairs to the home and concerned about damage to the property. Tree, of course, looks like it's off the sidewalk, not a quote unquote street tree. But again, street trees are legally defined as a tree within the public right of way. So this went from a applicant initiated removal to now where we're essentially saying, okay, well, if this tree is in the public right of way, this is now a tree that's the jurisdiction of Public Works. So that's just a point of clarification. So the tree itself, tree health is not in question. The tree health, the vigor is good. The structure is fair. I'll point that out in a moment. And what I'm showing here is a tape measure. It's a 15-foot wide public right of way. And so the tree just conveniently, pretty much all of its trunk sits squarely within the full public right of way. So there's no real dispute there. Here's the proximity to the sidewalk. The sidewalk's on the left. There's a lot of neighborhoods in San Francisco that were designed without street trees in mind in terms of located in the sidewalk towards the curb. There's the is landscaping accents at the back of sidewalk where landscaping has typically been installed. So as you can see, big tree, very inspirational, beautiful. That's not in doubt. But the real issue for us and for the property owner is the damage that it's beginning to cause to the home. And so this is the image that I really want to focus in on. If you look at the lower portion of the tree to the left side of the lower trunk, you can see where the tree itself is now outgrowing the space where it was planted. If you look at this part of this retaining wall and structure, that connects to the main structure of the home. So we wouldn't say, okay, we'll chop that off and, you know, buy yourselves 10 years and see us in 10 years. So it's unfortunate. It's a, you know, from an aesthetic perspective, certainly beautiful. Again, the only knock against it is that it has all these multiple stems that join very low to the ground. So our inspector said the tree was in very good health. I would say it's got fair structure, because where those join, there's potential in the future for those to split apart. So this is really an issue of sustainability and property damage. It's also on the gas line. I'm going to go through some of the notes that our inspector has presented. Again, this is showing a tape measure, but also shows how this trunk is actively pressing up against this wall. More images of the gas line. We typically want at least a minimum 3 feet of space from center of tree to center of gas line. So we're running into concerns about the gas line. And here are the notes from the inspector. So we have a 15-foot public right-of-way. The Monterey cypress is healthy, but it's outgrowing the planting area, causing damage to the house foundation that's visible from outside and inside the property. It's growing right up against the gas line with a probability for long-term or near future hazard or potential hazard. At the base of the tree creates a channel for water that's causing rot to the floor inside the home. Because there's no space there, it stays moist and it doesn't dry out. There is room for a replacement tree in that landscaping strip at the back of sidewalk. Certainly a different species, not something that's going to get this large. It's growing right up against the house. There are renovations that the property owner is trying to go through to aging foundation that can occur without destabilizing the tree due to excavation. Again, the tree is zero clearance from the gas line and zero clearance from the building. It's healthy, the tree is healthy, it continues to grow, is in conflict with the existing building and pressing against the gas line. So overall, we just found at the staff level that though the tree is big and provides amazing environmental, ecological, economic, social benefits, all of the things that we want mature trees to provide. The location itself is a classic example of wrong tree, wrong place. I hate to be on the side of approving trees for removal. I do want to point out that I think there's a lot of other people that probably would have removed this tree years ago. I know we're not giving people extra credit for holding on to trees, but it does seem like this tree has been held on to as long as possible. But at this point in time, at the staff level, due to property damage, which is not similar to sidewalk damage. Sidewalk damage, you just get out there, you keep repairing the sidewalk. It's just what we do in the city. But this is more structural, this is property damage, and I don't see a way to mitigate, prune this tree, or do major repairs to the home to prevent further damage to the tree. So those are the thoughts and considerations that went into this at the staff level. And to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases where trees are planted really too close to a foundation, the decision at the staff level was to approve the tree for removal. And then during the posting period, that proposed approval was protested by the public, and that triggered the hearing this evening. So again, this went from an applicant initiated removal to now one where Public Works is aware that the tree is our responsibility to maintain. And now we're looking at being in conversation. I can't quote what we will or won't cover claims wise, because I'm not an expert in that area. But this is turning now into more of the city looking at a likely claim for damage. So those are the moving pieces. Again, in the foreground of this image, even behind me a little bit, is where there's room to plant a replacement street tree. Certainly not a Monterey cypress. It's going to have to be a medium to small stature tree for this space right up against the building. And that concludes our staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We'll take testimony from appellant. If there's any appellants, please raise your hand.
There are no hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Is the property owner or representative present in the hearing?
We have Carl. I'm not sure how to say the last name. I apologize. Go ahead.
Hello, my name's Carl Malchow. I'm the property owner at 160 Miraloma.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Carl Malchow. I'm the property owner at 160 Miraloma Drive.
So, Mr. Malchow, if you'd like to, you have 3 minutes. If you'd like to provide any testimony in support of the removal, since it was protested, I think it'll, Chris already explained the technical issues, but you have an opportunity to further explain the need for the tree removal.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I just wanted to say I want to appreciate Chris's thorough evaluation of the situation. It covers it quite well. We would love to keep it as well, but we bought the house in 2019. So obviously the tree, I've trimmed it since then and started taking care of it. But we come to find now that after I investigated a little further, that it's, my foundation at the floor below is buckling and my floors are sagging and it's real wet, underneath. So like Chris had mentioned, the house won't, it's getting damaged to a fair degree. And so in order to fix all that, which I would like to do because we plan on staying there for a long time, I can't consider it with the tree and the roots doing what they're doing. It would be impossible to address a real fix. It's going to take an engineer. It's going to take quite a bit of concrete and a fair amount of work. So again, I appreciate the presentation from Chris, and I don't see any way around it. And as Chris had mentioned, we're fully willing to put a nice tree in the open area there to replace it, something medium. I've retained Davy Tree in the past. They're going to help us maybe with the city's input, what type of tree would be best there. We have some ideas, but so anyway, thank you very much, and hope we can get this done.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Malchow. Unless there's any other hands raised, I think we can close this order and move to the next order.
We have a hand raised from the public. Josh.
Okay.
Go ahead, Josh.
Thank you. Yeah, well, this is a shame. It's a beautiful tree, really, really beautiful tree that if you are a student of trees and what they can do for our environment, you understand that this is not only a beautiful tree, but also a very good tree for what we need right now in terms of climate change and sequestering carbon and all the other ecological benefits that a tree native to California, like Northern California like this provides. So that is really a loss. One of the things that is in our urban forest plan that I know there's a lot of complications around it, but I'm going to just keep bringing it up until hopefully one day it is actually programmatic, is wood reuse. So that we've got basically, I guess the term is a sort of cyclical economy of trees, so that we're not just chipping it and throwing it into a park where it then releases all that CO2 back into our environment. So I'm going to, I know that this went from sort of a private matter to a public matter, but maybe there's initiated removal. That is, I guess what I'm going to just throw out there as my public comment is the possibility that maybe this could be a time when we actually implement that part of the urban forest plan. Unless we start doing it, it's never going to happen. And that plan was put out in 2014. So it seems like 7 years in, it'd be really good to start doing that. Thanks.
Thank you, Josh. Cerise, if there's no other input, maybe I'll just throw it back to Chris real quick if he can just address Josh's comment about reusing the wood, if that's part of the plan or if there's anything that can be incorporated.
Sure. Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. We are trying to get a program in place. And so it's another reminder to circle back with our contract administration team. We have to put out a contract to have people, we need to have it be a competitive bidding process to create that wood reuse program. And so I think it's another example of the need to do that and to circle back on the status of that effort. So that is something that we will look into. So yeah, I hear that public comment and that public feedback, and it'll be something that I follow up with our superintendent on. And we have a candidate here where we divert that wood and keep it out of that, as Mr. Clip mentioned, that cycle and keeping it out, holding out of that carbon for as long as we can. So yeah, I will take a look at that and message her loud and clear.
Thank you, Chris. Cerise, if there's no other comments, then I'll close order number 204448.
There are no other hands.
Thank you. We'll move to the last order of the evening, 204449. And I'll have Public Works make the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. And I'm going to pull up that PowerPoint. Pardon me. Okay, so the final case we have is a tree that's actually on private property at 1868 Greenwich Street. And we haven't spoken about significant trees and what that means. So I'll just take a brief moment to do that. Overall, we approved the removal and the public has protested. And this is tree removal permit application 787727. So the subject tree is an avocado tree, and that's pictured here in the center of the screen. And until 2006, our ordinance did not have any jurisdiction over any trees on private property, but we lost a pretty amazing tree on private property in the Tenderloin in 2006, and supervisors amended our code so that Public Works has jurisdiction over trees in private property if they're within 10 feet of a public right of way. And I'll show you, you can see it, this tree is in close proximity to the public right of way. It's within 10 feet. And for a tree to be significant, it only needs to meet one of three size criteria, either a height greater than 20, which this tree has by just a little bit, canopy width greater than 15 feet. The tree certainly is wider than 15 feet wide, and a trunk diameter greater than 12 inches. So in this particular case, the trunk diameter at 4.5 feet above grade is 11 inches. So it's the canopy size that triggers this tree to act as a significant tree. And what that means is that it has the same protections as if it were a street tree. And so that's what we mean when we say significant tree. That's how we've come to that through our ordinance. And so here's an image from the side. You can see there's a kind of a raised curb at the start of the property line. That's rough, approximately where the property line is located, is the back of sidewalk at the base of that fence. You can see that raised 6-inch concrete form. Another image of the subject tree. At the moment, from my understanding, is the building is set way in back at the moment. This is just a copy of our posting that's within the file, showing the public what we're up to here, that we approved the tree at the staff level, which I'll get to that in a moment on why we did, and then reference the permit application number. We approved it essentially because it is conflicting with the location, the close proximity to the building footprint of what's proposed to be built at this site. Here's a side view showing the tree. It's set back from the sidewalk. It's unfortunate. It's a nice tree. You know, it's really filling the space nicely. And that's the idea with significant trees, is that even though they're on private property, if you look at it, it's actually bigger than a lot of the street trees right there in the immediate block. So it's providing this benefit as we almost on cue have someone with a stroller walking by. So the reason at the staff level that we approve this is that we've gone through this process of denial and approval over the years. And trees that we say at the staff level we're denying, when we deny a tree for removal, the message from our bureau is redesign your building around this tree. And so essentially we just feel like, even though it's a great tree, it's doing great right there. You can see it on Google Street View. We're also unfortunately a little bit realistic about, you know, how things get approved in the city, not approved. Now, earlier this evening, I said we want to keep our arborist hat on and really try to avoid playing the role of a planner and saying that this building is somehow valued, you know, better than the tree. In this particular case, all we're doing is saying, you know, if it was that large Monterey cypress that we were just looking at, it would be a different discussion. Again, tree is great for the site, but we just feel like it's reading the writing on the wall, and I don't think we're gonna win this battle if we say, yes, keep this tree and work around it. And the public may feel differently about that, which is absolutely their right to do. So just in general, this would be a removal without replacement, because the building of the new building would prevent the planting of another future potential significant replacement tree. And I was a little surprised, but this tree did not appraise that high. So for Northern California, this close to the coast, with all of our fog, and in the appraisal process, it's considered, you know, not a great species from a species ranking perspective. So we did the appraised value, because when we remove a tree and there's no replacement due to the loss caused by construction, our code directs us to either get an in lieu fee, which is about $1,900, $2,100, or the appraised value, whichever is the greater of the two. So our staff did the exercise of reasonably appraising this tree. That came to $2,800. So what we're essentially proposing at the staff level at Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry, is approving the tree for removal without replacement, but on the condition that the appraised value of $2,800 be paid to the city's Adopt a Tree Fund. And that fund is strictly for the funds the planting of street trees. It doesn't go to, you know, new tires in the truck. So that funding would go to the Adopt a Tree program and fund us to plant other street trees in the city. So there's nothing really wrong with the tree. Structurally, it's in reasonable, good condition, but the construction activities and placement of the foundation would necessitate removal. And just pointing out, I saw on Google Street View in preparation for the hearing this evening, I just noticed that there is an existing street tree out front. It's a smallish cherry tree. But at the moment, the plan would be for that tree to remain protected in place. But those are the kind of the key moving pieces on our end from the staff level perspective. And that's why at the staff level, we did actually approve the removal of this tree without replacement, and we assess the appraised value. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'd take on if there's any hands raised protesting the removal.
Yes, go ahead. There is Josh. Go ahead, Josh.
I guess before I make public comment, I'm still not clear what's happening here. Is this construction? Is this, I don't even, that wasn't part of the original presentation. So I'd respectfully like to be able to make my comment once I have that information.
Let's circle back to your appeal, Josh, after we hear from either the applicant or from Chris, if he can elaborate on what's the conflict in the new proposed construction. Is the applicant present? If the applicant is present and they could raise their hand, then we can have you provide more information on your project.
I do not see any hand raised at the time, at this time.
Yeah, maybe Chris, can you elaborate on what the project entails, if you know about it?
Sure, and I think certainly the plan would be to have the applicant here to present that information, but so that's unfortunate. We really do want to expect to hear from them about their project and all the particulars around that. But it's a good point. I didn't clarify that essentially this is an application for removal due to construction, modifying in some way the site to change or alter the building that's there and bring a new footprint and a new building, if not right where the tree is, certainly within inches or feet of that. So I was anticipating the applicant to provide all that information at the hearing, the plans, things of that nature. We have them in our file, but certainly we typically would have them go through all that in great detail. So Mr. Clip was right to point out, let's give them another 30 seconds if they're here or not. That's unfortunate, to not have that information at the hearing.
But this is to Chris Buck. When your team reviewed the application, you would have had some plans or materials that explain what the footprint was, and so you could assess whether it was truly impacting the tree or vice versa.
Yes. So Chris with Public Works, there's a few things we can certainly get on the record. One is they have a building proposal, and again, whether that's approved already or to be approved, any approvals of this tree for removal would be conditioned on the applicant to obtain any required approvals to construct the proposed building. So sometimes we share the plan and go into some minor detail on that, and again, have the applicant present all that. The goal here would be to have them, make their own case. But based on the application and the information they presented, the plans that we reviewed, again, what we're saying is, okay, if this, on a condition of their project approval at the staff level, this is a tree that we're not denying. It's a little awkward if we don't have that information present. And I would have to double check how we've handled that in the past, whether we reschedule and or whether they provide that information directly to the hearing officer. Thank you.
just to be fair to the applicant, were they informed by Buff about the protest so that they would know to show up to the hearing? I just don't want to cast them as not having a chance, or having a chance and not presenting.
Yes,
If
they were
that-
notified.
Okay.
And that,
I'll have to look at what they provided in the files and decide whether or not this needs to be reheard or if the information provided is sufficient. But I think the appellant deserves at least an opportunity to understand the project as well.
I agree with that. I just wanted to state that typically what we do if someone isn't at a hearing is we'll check emails and voicemails, anything from earlier in the day to tomorrow morning, just to see if there was something that happened. So I do agree that, again, not wanting to point any fingers, wishing to gather that information and provide that to you as the hearing officer.
Okay, we'll table that until we get more information in the next couple days as to why we didn't have that in hand. And then I'll still let Josh have an opportunity, given what we think we know, to make testimony about the removal.
Okay, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I understand, Chris, that usually the process is the applicant would show up and provide lots of drawings and things. And so it just seemed like that was sort of just kind of didn't happen. But, you know, earlier, we've had a couple of things earlier in this hearing. One obviously was the large development that such a big deal. We had an arborist and a developer and a project manager and even two reps from the mayor's office. And we were talking about, tree removal for development. I went into that in great detail, but about how that's not generally part of the process and how disappointing that is, and how wrong it is, because this is infrastructure and this is what we need for our city and our planet right now. If ever there were a time in our history, we need it now. The other thing that came up earlier, Chris, I think said, that there's I wrote it down somewhere, but something about a perception that the city doesn't stand up for its trees. And that's what this feels like. This, I'm looking at this picture and we've got this, what looks like a brand new construction that was done here. And apparently this brand new construction was capable of being performed around this tree. And my guess is that was probably a real selling point. When you look at this, because it's beautiful, this sort of modern construction with this gorgeous avocado tree right next to it. And this sort of sad cherry tree in the public right of way that is providing zero ecological benefits and is probably not long for this world. That thing's probably not going to last another 5 years. And here we are taking out this gorgeous avocado tree because of construction. That's that. And I can't stop it from happening. That's what those of us out here who fight so hard for this need our city officials to do, is to stop this from happening. And I know there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. There's a lot of politics and money and all these things I have no knowledge of and frankly don't want to. Leave that up to you. But we need people to push back and say, look, let's find another way. We have got to preserve the healthy canopy, the mature, healthy canopy. All the science tells us, all the research tells us, we need our city officials to say that when the rubber meets the road, to rely on that and push back on things like this when we can, and we can here. So, I don't have much, eloquence to offer here, but Chris, this is where we need you. This is where we need you and your team. And the last thing I'll say is that appraisal fee, I realize there's a lot of math there, But what it comes down to is basically the cost of a single sapling in San Francisco. To take out a tree like that and put in some spindly little 1.5 inch, 24, maybe 24 inch box tree, maybe probably a 15 gallon, who knows, that may or may not make it past its 3 years. That is not a trade we should be making. We should be satisfied with making with the world that we're living in right now with the information that we have. So I respectfully object to this removal.
Thank you, Mr. Cliff. That's your time.
Is there anyone else giving testimony on this project, on this order?
I see no other hands at this time.
Okay. On this case, there'll be some follow-up, so we'll get in touch with you, Josh, to let you know if there's going to be a postponement or more information provided. We'll have to discuss internally how we handle that. And hopefully the valuation includes whatever guacamole that tree can make. But I think that's the last case for the evening. So if there's anyone who came in late who hasn't spoken yet, who would like to give testimony on any of the items discussed tonight, I'll give you an opportunity to raise your hand, and otherwise we'll close this hearing. I'll give another 30 seconds or so. All right, not hearing anything. I think that will conclude this hearing, and I will make my recommendations to the director. And thank you all for your testimony this evening. And I'm closing the hearing. The hearing is now closed.